You know that feeling when you're watching the news or scrolling through Twitter and something feels off? Like the people in charge are still giving speeches like it's 2015, but the world has already moved on without them? That unease in your stomach that you can't quite name? Yeah, me too. And today I want to talk about why that feeling is actually correct. I'm Emma Chamberlain, and welcome back to Infographics. Here's what I've been thinking about lately, and I want to start with something personal because I think it connects to much bigger things in a way that might surprise you. I used to believe that working in silence was the only way to get anything done. I remember hearing this old animation legend, Ken Harris, who said something that stuck with me for years and years. Someone asked him, "Do you listen to music while you work?" And he just laughed and said, "Why would I do that? I'm not clever enough to do two things at once. I'm either working or I'm listening to music." For the longest time, I felt exactly the same way. I thought multitasking was a complete lie sold to us by productivity influencers who don't actually do real work. I thought focus meant total silence. I thought that if you were truly working hard, you wouldn't have any mental space left for background noise. But recently, I've discovered something strange, something that made me question my own assumptions. There are certain boring, repetitive tasks, you know the ones, sorting through old files, answering the same emails over and over, organizing folders that haven't been touched in years, cleaning out your camera roll, doing your taxes, where my hands can run on autopilot and my brain can actually absorb a really good podcast or an audiobook. It's like my body is doing one thing and my mind is doing another, and somehow both get done. And that's how I stumbled onto something that genuinely scared me, like pause the task and just stare at the wall scared, like rewind that part and listen again scared, like text your friend at midnight scared. I was listening to a geopolitical analyst break down what just happened between the United States, Iran, and Israel. Not a pundit, not a talking head, an actual expert who has spent decades studying how these conflicts work. And the conclusion was so simple, so brutal, and so opposite to everything you hear on cable news that I had to stop what I was doing and just sit there in silence for a minute. Here it is. Lean in because this matters more than almost anything else I've talked about on this channel. Donald Trump's entire political playbook, the bold claims, the sharp reversals, the public pressure, the "you're fired" mentality, the constant performance of strength, the way he turns everything into a reality show confrontation. It works on television. It works on the campaign trail. It even works with his most loyal supporters, who see him as a fighter. But when you apply that same playbook to war, to international alliances, to nuclear deterrence, to situations where real human lives are on the line and mistakes cannot be undone, it doesn't just fail, it backfires catastrophically. And the people who suffer are never the politicians. They're ordinary people living in conflict zones. They're soldiers sent to fight wars without clear objectives. They're families who get caught in the middle of someone else's ego. Let me explain why, step by step. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll see the world a little differently. The interview that got under my skin was between a reporter named Louis Goodall and an Iran expert named Ali Vaez. Vaez is not someone who goes on television to shout. He's quiet. He's careful. He chooses his words like a surgeon chooses where to cut. And he said something that I haven't been able to shake for weeks. Something that keeps coming back to me every time I see another headline about the Middle East. He said that Iran doesn't need to win a war. They don't need a dramatic battlefield victory. They don't need to capture territory or destroy an enemy army. They don't need to force a surrender or sign a peace treaty on their terms. All they need is ambiguity. That's it. Just enough confusion to keep everyone off balance. Think about that for a second. Really think about it. Let it sit in your mind. While the West demands clear wins, clean resolutions, and satisfying endings like a Hollywood movie where the good guys ride off into the sunset, Iran is perfectly happy living in the gray zone. Confusion, that's their primary weapon. Inconsistency, that's their strongest shield. Delays, those are their tactics. Contradictions, those are their allies. Every time a Western leader says one thing and does another, Iran gains ground without firing a single shot. And here's where Trump comes into the picture. Within days of the latest military escalation with Iran, Trump did something that his supporters call strategic unpredictability, but that military experts and NATO commanders call an absolute nightmare for alliance cohesion. He demanded allied support from European nations. Then he said he didn't need it and that America could handle things alone. He threatened massive escalation against Iranian nuclear facilities and military commanders. Then he distanced himself from the actual outcomes on the ground when things got complicated. He publicly questioned NATO's value in one sentence, calling it obsolete and unfair to American taxpayers. Then he relied on NATO's intelligence sharing and deterrent infrastructure in the very next breath. You see the problem, right? You don't need to be a 4-star general to see how destructive this is. You just need basic common sense. One of the highest-ranking military leaders in Europe, General Hans Lothar Domros, a man who has spent his entire life studying deterrence and alliance warfare, said Trump's rhetoric was not wise. And that's diplomatic language. In plain English, that means dangerously reckless, bordering on irresponsible. Because deterrence, the thing that has kept Europe from exploding into another world war for over 70 years, depends on one thing and one thing only: clarity, certainty, predictability, the absolute, unshakable, rock-solid knowledge that if you attack one NATO country, you attack all of them. No exceptions, no delays, no negotiation, no fine print. That certainty is the entire point of NATO. It's not about the weapons, it's not about the troops, it's about the promise. And a promise only works if everyone believes it. But when an American president publicly calls NATO a paper tiger, those were his exact words. What do you think Tehran hears? What do you think Moscow hears while planning its next move in Ukraine? What do you think Beijing hears while watching the South China Sea and building military bases on artificial islands? They hear weakness. They hear division. They hear an alliance that might not actually hold together when tested. Vladimir Putin doesn't need NATO to collapse completely. He doesn't need a dramatic victory in Ukraine where he marches into Kyiv. He doesn't need to rebuild the Soviet Union overnight. He just needs hesitation. He needs one moment of doubt in a European capital. He needs 1 week where the alliance doesn't respond unanimously to an act of aggression. He needs one phone call where a leader says, "Let's wait and see what happens before we commit." And Trump just handed that doubt to him on a silver platter. Not through malice necessarily, through incompetence, through a fundamental misunderstanding of how alliances actually work, through a worldview that treats everything as a transaction rather than a relationship. Now let's talk about Benjamin Netanyahu, because this is where the story gets even darker and more personal for millions of people in the Middle East. And I want you to really pay attention here, because this part doesn't get enough attention in American media. I want you to rewind your memory to October of last year, right after the Hamas attacks. When the images came out, the videos, the testimonies, the raw horror of it, the whole world was horrified. There was genuine sympathy for Israel, not the performative kind. Real, tangible, heartfelt support from Western governments, from the United Nations, from ordinary people holding vigils in city squares around the world, from celebrities posting on Instagram, from world leaders visiting Jerusalem to show solidarity. And Netanyahu had a clear path forward. It was actually simple, at least in theory. Rescue the hostages by any means necessary. degrade Hamas's military capability so they couldn't repeat the attack, protect civilians as much as humanly possible in a dense urban environment, then step back, rebuild international trust, and use that political capital to strengthen Israel's position in the region. That was the play. It was right there in front of him. That is not what happened. And we all watched it unfold in real time, on our phones, on our TVs, on our social media feeds. We couldn't look away. Instead, Netanyahu launched a revenge campaign against the entire Gaza Strip, not against Hamas fighters hiding in tunnels, against an entire population of 2 million people trapped in one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Hospitals, schools, refugee camps, apartment buildings, journalists, aid workers. Nothing was off limits. And here we are, months later, with over 35,000 dead, a majority of them women and children, according to every independent health organization. The hostages still not rescued after countless failed negotiations. Hamas still operating as both a political and military force despite the bombing. And Israel more diplomatically isolated than it has been since its founding in 1948. Let that sink in for a moment. Really let it land. The hostages are still not home. That was the primary goal. The families are still waiting. The posters are still on walls. And the military campaign continues without a clear end in sight. Netanyahu spent years, actually decades, telling the world that Iran was a problem with a decisive solution. Strike hard and fast. Use Israel's unmatched intelligence superiority, which is real and impressive. Apply constant regional pressure through covert operations and cyber attacks. Build historic alliances with Arab states through the Abraham Accords, and the Iranian threat would eventually disappear like morning fog. But here's the thing that nobody on cable news wants to admit, because it's uncomfortable and it doesn't fit into a 30-second soundbite. If Netanyahu and Israeli intelligence could see that plan 10 or 15 years ago, so could Iran. Iran has its own intelligence services. Iran has its own strategists. Iran has been watching and learning and adapting for 40 years. And Iran spent that entire decade preparing. Not for a single dramatic strike that they would lose. Not for a conventional war with the United States that would end in disaster. For a long, grinding, multi-front proxy war that would drain Israeli resources, fracture its international alliances, turn Gaza into an open wound, and make the entire world question whether Israel can actually defend itself over the long term. And guess what? That plan worked. It worked better than Iran probably even hoped. It worked so well that Iran barely had to do anything directly. They just lit the fuse and let their proxies do the rest. Iran's response to Israeli strikes was never a direct missile attack on Tel Aviv. That would be stupid and suicidal. Iran's leaders are many things, but they are not stupid. Instead, Iran activated its entire network of proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon, with over 150,000 rockets aimed at Israeli cities. The Houthis in Yemen shutting down Red Sea shipping and firing missiles at commercial vessels. Militias in Syria and Iraq attacking American bases almost weekly, to apply pressure from every direction at once. No single attack is decisive, but the cumulative effect is that Israel is now fighting a regional war with no clear exit strategy and no end in sight. Every front is active, every border is hot, and every day brings a new headline. This is what Ali Vaez meant when he said that Iran learned its brutal lessons from the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. That war lasted 8 years. 1 million people died. And at the end, nothing was resolved. Back then, Iran realized something painful and transformative. It could not win a conventional war against a better-equipped enemy with superior technology and international support. So it changed the entire game. It invented ambiguity as a weapon. It made patience a strategy. It turned asymmetry into an art form. And the West still hasn't figured out how to respond, because the West keeps looking for a knockout punch that will never come. Now let's zoom out to the NATO dimension, because this is the part that keeps European defense officials awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, running through worst-case scenarios in their heads. There is a classified assessment that has been circulating quietly among Dutch, German, and British intelligence agencies. I want to be careful how I phrase this because it's not public information in the sense that you can Google it, but it has been referenced in multiple credible publications by journalists who have seen it or spoken to officials who have, and it identifies something called the vulnerability window, the specific period between 2028 and 2030, when European rearmament will still be incomplete, American political commitment will be deeply uncertain regardless of who wins the next election, and Russian conventional forces will have fully rebuilt from their catastrophic losses in Ukraine. That window is only 3 to 5 years away. That is not a long time. That is tomorrow morning in geopolitical terms. That is one presidential term. That is the amount of time it takes to build a single aircraft carrier or train a new generation of officers. And Trump's public comments about NATO are not random. They are not offhand remarks from a chaotic mind that doesn't know better. They are central to a broader worldview of questioning every single alliance that the United States has spent 7 decades and trillions of dollars building. When the former president calls NATO obsolete, he is not just talking to American voters at a rally in Ohio. He is talking directly to Tehran. He is talking directly to Moscow. He is talking directly to Beijing. And they are all taking detailed notes. They have entire departments dedicated to analyzing every word he says. Here is the synthesis that genuinely scared me more than anything else I've heard this year. The interview I listened to connected 4 things that most news outlets treat as completely separate stories: Iran, Israel, the United States, NATO. Each one gets its own segment, its own experts, its own ticker at the bottom of the screen. But when you put them all together into a single strategic picture, a clear and terrifying image emerges. The West is losing the ability to project certainty. Adversaries no longer believe that American red lines are real. They have seen too many threats that didn't materialize, too many deadlines that passed without consequences. Allies no longer believe that American promises will be kept. They have heard too many statements that were walked back the next day. And in geopolitics, perception is reality. It does not matter how many aircraft carriers you have. It does not matter how much you spend on defense. It does not matter how many special forces you can deploy. If your enemies think you are weak, you are weak. Right now, in this moment. Perception shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcomes. And outcomes shape history. Now, the analyst I was listening to, Ali Vaez, also pointed out something that almost never gets discussed on American television because it's uncomfortable and religious and doesn't fit into a 30-second news segment. The Iranian regime is not just a political dictatorship. It is not just a theocracy. It is an apocalyptic religious movement with a specific timeline and a specific set of beliefs. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, now effectively controls the entire country. The politicians are figureheads. The real power lies with the generals. And those generals are driven by a theological obsession with setting the stage for the return of the hidden imam, a messianic figure in Shia Islam, whose return they genuinely and fervently believe will be preceded by global chaos, war, the destruction of existing orders, and the triumph of the faithful. This is not metaphor. This is not exaggeration. This is what they actually believe. And when you believe that chaos is a spiritual necessity, you behave very differently than someone who wants stability and peace. That is not a group that negotiates in good faith the way Western diplomats expect. That is not a group that can be deterred by economic sanctions or diplomatic condemnations or United Nations resolutions. That is a group that sees chaos as a pathway to salvation. That changes everything about how you have to respond. You cannot reason with someone who thinks the end of the world is a good thing. And the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, through which 20% of the world's oil passes every single day, is their choke point. It is their nuclear option without the nuclear weapons. If Iran ever decides to close it, even for a week, global oil prices would triple within days. The world economy would tip into a deep recession before most people even understood what happened. Groceries would become unaffordable for millions of families. Gas would go back to $4, $5, $6 a gallon. Supply chains would break down. And there would be no quick military solution to reopen it, because clearing mines and securing shipping lanes takes months, not days. So here is where we actually are right now. Not where politicians say we are on television, not where the press releases claim we are, where we actually are. Trump's method exposed the hard limits of personal diplomacy in a multi-actor conflict where no single person controls all the pieces. Netanyahu's strategy revealed the permanent gap between military dominance and political resolution. You can win every battle and still lose the war. NATO's internal tensions showed the difference between a formal written alliance and actual perceived commitment on the ground. And the result is a global shift in perception that is already happening whether we admit it or not. The shift is real, the shift is measurable, and the shift is dangerous. Adversaries see opportunity, allies see uncertainty. Ordinary people, you and me, watching the news, paying taxes, raising families, trying to live our lives, we see the headlines every night and feel that something fundamental has broken, even if we can't quite name it or explain it to our friends over dinner. That feeling is not paranoia. That feeling is pattern recognition. Your brain is telling you that the old rules don't apply anymore. I'm not predicting the future. I don't have a crystal ball. Nobody does. Anyone who tells you they know exactly what will happen next is selling something. But what I learned from that interview is that the present already contains the seeds of everything that comes next. The crisis we are living through right now is anchored in decisions made 10, 20, 30, even 40 years ago. The Iran-Iraq war, the invasion of Iraq, the nuclear deal, the withdrawal from the nuclear deal, the assassination of Soleimani. Every choice has led to this moment, and the way we respond today, with clarity or confusion, with unity or division, with strategy or impulse, will define the world our children inherit. That sounds dramatic, I know, but it's also just true. If you found this analysis useful, infographics will keep bringing you the stories that actually matter, not the shouting matches, not the manufactured outrage designed to keep you angry and scrolling, not the hot takes from people who have never studied anything, just the truth about how power really works, who actually has it, who is losing it, and what that means for all of us. Thanks for listening. I'm Emma Chamberlain, and I'll see you in the next one.